it may be luck, but it seems that good luck happens most to those who are faithfully doing the right thing. All right. Well, welcome to Medical Sales U. Our guest today is Dillon Fulks. He is a senior at the Ohio State University. We met in a coffee shop about a month ago, and even then, you were going after it, Dillon. And he has an interesting story, but he has landed a job at J&J as an associate with DePuy Synthes. And we're excited, Dillon, to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. I'll go ahead and out myself from the beginning. I've never been on a podcast before, so definitely feeling special, feeling a little extra cool today. So I appreciate you having me on, man.
Well, you're a communicator. You are a leader. When I met with you with coffee, you told me a little bit about your story, your volunteer work. Helping other students and youth. Um, you're like me, you're a son of a pastor. You have a natural ability to communicate. I found that out about you when we met for coffee. But tell us what got you interested in medical sales. Tell us a little bit about your journey of what kind of stirred up that interest to choose this career path.
Yeah, yeah. My initial interest in medical sales started probably somewhere about 2 years ago. My The first person I talked to about it was Kevin Unger. We sat down for lunch about 2 years ago. I was thinking about a lot of different stuff. I was like, I guess I could do real estate. All I really knew is that I was interested in anatomy and I really love people. And that was pretty much all I knew. And so I started talking to my dad and I was like, what's if I like anatomy and people? I was like, it's pretty much all I know. I'm a sophomore in college. You got people asking you, hey, what are you gonna do for the rest of your life? What do you want to do? What do you want to do? What's your major? And so I was starting to feel a little bit of that pressure. And so I sat down with Kevin because Kevin started out at Stryker, and he's a med tech entrepreneur now. He's the president of the Enabling Technologies Division of Orthopediatrics now, where I'm interning at. Um, so he's been all over and done just about everything. And he's kind of one of those guys that knows everybody. And I can't speak highly enough of Kevin, but I sat down with him and he sort of told me whenever I was talking about anatomy and people, he was explaining to me how a lot of device sales is emotional intelligence and being able to balance. Okay, you've got your scrub tech and your surgeon who are different than the scrub tech and the surgeon in the next OR, and that anatomy and people, it ticked my interest right away. So that kind of spiraled into what we'll probably talk about a little bit more here soon, but spiraled into me talking to a lot of different people in and adjacent to medical device sales.
What was that like becoming an intern for him? How did that transition? You meet him for a while, you start picking his brain, learning from him, asking questions, and even when we met a while back, you were great at asking the right questions. What did that? How did that transition into actually becoming an intern with his organization?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we probably had lunch 2 or 3 times. So we had that initial lunch, and then 6 or 7 months went by. I talked to a couple other people to make sure it's kinda what I wanted to do. So I knew, and I've known Kevin long before we got lunch to talk about that. So we've had a pretty long-standing, relationship. So so as I took more and more interest, and I started sitting down with people, and as I tried to begin networking to figure out what's the market like in Columbus, I started to get a lot of people weren't responding to me because I didn't have anything sales or anything device on my resume at all. So I thought about that, and I knew what Kevin was doing in orthopediatrics, and in my mind, I just know who Kevin is, and I know what he does, and I was like, if I could get mentored by someone, if I could turn into someone in 15, 20 years, Kevin would be the guy. So I was like, that's my first ask, and if that doesn't go well, there'll be other people to ask, but I asked Kevin, and he was like, yeah, let me talk to a couple of people and work a couple of things out, and so he sat down, and it seems like it should have been harder to be able to be around a guy like Kevin that much, but it was kind of a one or two conversation thing because we'd had prior conversations, multiple conversations before that about the industry and what it's like. So it kind of snowballed into a one or two conversation thing about the internship, and then we kind of got rolling, and doing a lot of marketing and design and thinking sales while I do that. So it's cool just and the best part about it is just getting to be around Kevin and be a sponge around a guy like him who's so wise.
What are some of the biggest things that you've learned from him?
You're asking for a long podcast here, Dave. That's a loaded question for me because I feel like a lot of the stuff that I've learned about the industry and how to balance having a family. Kevin's a family guy and he's a really good dad, really good husband. So a lot of what I've learned is how can you work really hard and love your family really well. And he's modeled that really well for me. But I think if I had to boil it down to one or two things that I've learned from Kevin, I think the first one was interesting because I haven't really done like I'm not I think a lot of people that intern for device companies are running trays and getting their hands and all I've done for Kevin is marketing and design work. So we got their enabling technologies website. That's going to be up and running, I believe, here soon in the next couple of weeks. And then, like
Okay.
I said, he's more of a med tech entrepreneur. So I've done a couple of things here and there for him outside of orthopediatrics as well. So I think um, probably the value of emotional intelligence and networking is probably the number one thing that I've
Mhm.
learned from Kevin. If I had to boil it down, I mean, again, I could talk about it. I could talk about it all afternoon, but I think the number one thing, getting to watch him interact with people internally and externally, watch how he interacts with different people differently. Kevin himself doesn't change. He's a very genuine guy, but Kevin always adjusts to the environment that he's in and he does that really well, but not in an ingenuine, maybe used car salesman sort of way.
Mm.
So he's very genuine with everyone, but he adapts to his environment very well, and he knows who he's talking to. And he's let me sit in on a couple of different calls with him, and just to get to watch him interact with people and the ways that people think of Kevin because of the ways that he treats people behind the scenes as well, and the value of integrity is I'll probably tack that one on to emotional intelligence. Just the things that I
Mm.
hear about Kevin from other people that have done business with Kevin, not even in front of him, and just how good of a guy he is behind the scenes. So I'm gonna cut
Well, you
myself off
mentioned
on
2
purpose.
things. Those are 2 things you mentioned, emotional intelligence and integrity. Because I think is both is are extremely important. When we're in the operating room, we're gonna, in your role, it's likely that you'll run into other reps, maybe in the same operating room, maybe in the hallway. You'll see competitors. You'll meet other people, and being new, it's likely that you like the rest of us are going to make mistakes, and in those moments where we don't know the answer to a question, when we may have done something not exactly right, how to adjust, how to read the room, be a person of integrity, but tell the truth, and then find the help when needed. I think those are two things that are key. It's true in especially pharma, in oncology where I am as well, because we're selling very sophisticated treatments that are groundbreaking, and yet there's competitors out there as well, and it's very important that we don't misrepresent as well. Um, Emotional intelligence. Maybe we could just kind of talk about that a little bit because we hear that word, um, you know, thrown around a little bit, but it's something I think that a lot of new reps may not understand. People who are just thinking about going into sales. What do you mean? Maybe just for your average peer, your another college student. What is emotional intelligence? How would you define that, or how would you describe what that includes?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of different components to it depending on what you do decide to do. Like I think there's a lot of stuff out there. I was actually looking stuff up about it this week of because I say it a lot and like I said it a lot in different interviews and I was talking to my dad about it and he was like you should probably like look some stuff up about it or like read a book about it. So I'm actually thinking about reading a book about emotional intelligence. I was actually going to order it later today. So there's a lot of people that define it a lot of different ways. I think the unprofessional Dillon Fulks definition of emotional intelligence. I think a lot of it is self awareness in your environment, and how do you use people's strengths and weaknesses in that environment to cultivate. the environment that you're looking for, which is most likely always going to be a healthy one, whether that's the OR, whether that is within your personal team, or like you said, towards your competitors in the hallway.
Mhm.
You're gonna be interacting with a lot of different people. So how can you be self-aware and aware of the environment around you, and adapt to the needs and help people's strengths and weaknesses work together to cultivate a healthy environment of growth? So a couple of
Yeah.
examples
I like that.
uh, that people have given me. One of them was Kevin. Of He was like, so sometimes you're not gonna be prepared. You know, your schedule is filled, and you have to go into an office meet with the surgeon. You have to go into his office, and you don't know anything about him. You haven't had a chance to prepare, but you get in there and you walk in. You see that maybe their desk is messy, right? And then you look at the wall and you see they're holding the fair. Maybe they're a big game hunter or something like that, or they like to fish. And he's like, so you're walking and you see a picture of a family, right? They got 3 or 4 kids. And he's like, so you walk in, you're aware of your environment, you're aware that you're a salesperson, so there's probably some walls up that are going to be up on their end because you are trying to sell them something. So you walk in and you take all 3 of these things, and it's like, okay, their desk is messy. They're a big game hunter. So, like, how can I use this? And we can talk and we can break down some walls, and how can we get to know each other? And then when I'm selling, I see that their desk is messy, and the last thing that they need is another thing on their plate. And but you don't, it's like there's not a ton of questions that you can ask, or there's only so many questions that you can ask to understand that. And sometimes you have to uncover an unmet need, and identifying things like that in your environment, and being able to add value and cultivate a healthy environment, whether that's an office or an OR. I think a lot of it comes down to awareness and ability to personality match.
Wow. I like that. That is really good. Dylan, have you been in the operating, room yet?
I have been. I actually with DePuy Synthes, part of my interview process, I actually got to shadow a 15-hour day. I got to see 5 different surgeries, which was pretty cool. And then tomorrow, I'm getting to shadow at Nationwide Children's with Dr. Sharshman.
Wow. Tell us about that. What can you tell us about that 15-hour day?
It was awesome. It's funny because obviously through the interview process, it's just as much them interviewing me as it is me interviewing them. So, as I get in there and, I'm talking to a bunch of different people before I get in there because I'm like, I don't want to be the guy that gets in there and passes out. That was my biggest fear. I was like, I don't want to throw up. I don't want to pass out. I don't want to be that guy. I'm there to shout. I don't want to touch the blue stuff. I don't want to make something not sterile. So trying to avoid all the big mess ups. And I was really nervous going into the day. So just following Colin around, and it was so fascinating. I didn't even think about the fact that like people were being cut open just because I was so fascinated. Because I mean, it's funny you talk about all this stuff. Like you said, we met at a coffee shop. I've had a lot of conversations with people in a coffee shop, and you sort of put a face to everything when you see a patient cut open on the table. And man, just the opportunity to help people. I was just fascinated by the anatomy and getting to see stuff like that firsthand. And you definitely have to be careful. Don't touch the blue stuff was the advice that I got. So and you definitely
Right.
get more comfortable throughout the day. So the first, 4 or 5 hours, I was like, okay, don't touch the blue stuff. And then Colin, who's on my team now, he had to put his hand on my chest a couple of times because I was getting close. You get a little bit more comfortable. So it
Yes.
was really really cool to see all these things that I've talked about. Like talking to the scrub tech and the surgeon, and making sure that you're keeping the scrub tech 3 steps out of the surgeon, but the there was actually a point where one surgery was going on with Colin, and in that room, the scrub tech had never used our devices before. They'd never seen one of our trays. And then in the other room, it was a scrub tech that's been at Ohio State for 5 years. So it's like I got to be in both rooms. I was bouncing back and forth and seeing it's that a piece of that emotional intelligence piece that I'm talking about. Of Colin walked the one scrub tech you'd never seen. He walked her through setting up everything, and then Tyler
Mm.
in the other room with Will was his name, who's been at Ohio State for a while. He didn't speak very much because honestly, probably would have been a little bit offensive to Will because he's seen that probably triple digit times. He's used our trays, and so he knows what he's doing. So Tyler stepped in when needed and made sure they were 3 steps ahead. But Tyler was talking a lot less than Colin. But if they switched rooms, Tyler would have been talking a lot more than Colin because of who he's around. So it was fascinating to actually get to be in there and see it, and also trying to figure out making sure I know left from right and to not touch the blue stuff. So it was
So a
an
15-hour
adrenaline rush
day,
for
that would
sure.
have been, how many surgeries, a 15-hour day?
It was 5 surgeries.
5 surgeries. So you got up, what time did you wake up? What did your day did run us through your day. What time did you wake up? What time were you there?
So we got there. I met them in the hospital lobby at 7. So I tried to be 15 minutes early. So I was there at 6:45. And I'm actually just a 15, like 10, 15 minute walk from the hospital right now. So I left my house at 6:30. So I probably got up at 5, between 5:30 and 5:45. Showered and I put a suit on. Cause in the middle of the day, I actually had an interview with Bob, who runs the distributorship. So I wanted to be in a
Uh-huh.
suit for that, for good optics for my interview. So woke up, showered, put my suit on between 5:30 and 5:45, and was over there by 6:45. And then I saw two surgeries in the morning, and then I took my scrubs off, put my suit back on, and then I met with Bob for 2 hours for an interview. And then Bob headed out, and I took my suit back off, scrubbed back in, and that's when I was going back and forth between Colin and Tyler's room. And then Colin was with Dr. Yu that day, and Dr. Yu only had two surgeries, so they finished up, and then Dr. Kavori had one more ACDF left to go, so we finished out the day. And after it was all said and done, I walked out of the hospital at 10:30 p.m.
Wow, what a day. What a day.
What a
And,
day! It was
what an
awesome.
interview process as well. Tell us about your interview process, maybe with J&J, but also you were simultaneously interviewing with multiple companies. Walk us through how you landed your first interview. Were you able to leverage, letting companies know that you're interviewing with anyone? How did you do that? Tell us how you landed your first interview.
Yeah, honestly, it's not a heroic story how I landed my first interview, and it has mostly to do with the grace of God and kind of stumbling into it that I got my first interview. But I had a buddy who was 2 years ahead of me, who's on the DePuy team, and I had known that he had started a couple years ago. So we actually got coffee about a year and a half back. He was one of the guys that I met with that Kevin recommended that I meet with because he was 3 or 4 months in, so everything was fresh. His name's Connor Crawford, so everything was fresh for Connor. So I knew that Connor was still loving it and he was still doing it. So I got coffee with Connor again at the beginning of January, and I was my big ask, like where I wanted to make it, and so we caught up and everything. I was asking him how work was, and I was like, "Man, can I just shadow?" Because I really wanted to get in there and make sure. Like I said, I didn't want to be the guy that passed out. I didn't want to choose it as a career and then be really squeamish in the OR. So that was my ask of Connor. I was like, "Man, could you stick your neck out for me and see if you could get me in the OR?" So he talks to Colin, who I've been referring to, Colin Clammer. So he asked Colin if I can get into shadow, and Colin was like, "Well, why does you want to shadow so bad?" And Connor was like, "Well, he's like, I've known him for a while. He's been pretty interested in this for a while." And Connor also knew Kevin, and Kevin's done similar stuff for me and Connor. So he's like, he's worked with Kevin, and Connor didn't even know that Colin was thinking about bringing someone on at the time. But
Hmm.
Colin was like, "Well, if he wants to get in the OR so bad, why doesn't he just interview?" So Connor just texted me back, and he was like, "Hey, would you want to interview?" And I didn't think the interviews were honestly going to happen until right around this time. Like I was just hoping to have multiple interviews rolling through graduation. So
Mhm.
like I said, it was nothing but the favor and goodness of God that I landed my first interview, and that's sort of what kind of started the ball rolling. Because then you start sitting down with other people from Medtronic and from Arthrex and from Stryker, and people take you. People see that you're doing an internship, and they're like, "Okay, I'll meet with you." But people started to take me a little more serious when I was like, "I'm actively interviewing with the DePuy Synthes spine team here in Columbus," and people sort of snap in and
So
take
you
you a little bit
leveraged
more
that. So
serious.
you when you interviewed with other companies, once you started that formal interview process, you leveraged and said, "Well, yes, I am interviewing." Now, did they ask you that? Did they say, "Are you interviewing with anyone else?" Because I've been asked that many times. Or did you just kind of casually lay it out, like,
It was probably 50-50. Some people would ask, some people
yeah.
wouldn't, but I always tried to make it known because of that. Being a guy in college, people don't really take you serious, and you kind of have to give them a reason to. So, and even with the DePuy guys, because I networked and interviewed all the way through, because my interview process with DePuy was probably a total of 7 or 8 weeks. So I interviewed with other people, and as I did stuff and networked, I would make sure that they knew what I was doing. Like, they'd be like, "Oh, what do you have going on the rest of the week?" And I had it on deck. I was rattling off like, "Oh, I'm meeting with this surgeon." Like I was meeting with Dr. Scharschmidt, who I'm shadowing with tomorrow. It's like, "Oh, I'm getting breakfast with Dr. Scharschmidt, and they're covering a case tomorrow with Dr. Scharschmidt." You know, so
Wow,
just
now
trying
how did
to
you
do
schedule
all
that
that.
how did that breakfast come about? That's fantastic.
So this is another funny one that has everything to do with the goodness of God. But he's actually next door neighbors with a longtime family friend of mine.
Okay,
So all they told me, and then my parents are really good friends with my family friends. So they knew who Dr. Scharschmidt was just from being around them and them being neighbors. So all they told me about Dr. Scharschmidt was that he was a pediatric surgeon. And I was like,
okay.
okay, that's not like, I don't know if I want to do. I was like, I've been in orthopediatrics. I'm not sure that that's, what I want to do. But I was like, I'm sure that we can connect. I was like, that's just kind of my whole interview process. Is there's no such thing as a bad connection. So I was like, okay, let me just, meet with everybody. Like I really genuinely wasn't thinking very much of it because all they told me was that he's a pediatric surgeon. I was like, okay. So we go to breakfast and, we're probably 10, 15 minutes in. We're just catching up and he starts telling me about how he's trying to make Nationwide Children's a global leader in pediatric oncology. And he does orthopedics and oncology. And I was like, you're not just a pediatric surgeon. So it's pretty funny. And he was like, yeah, so I'm doing this tumors case on a spine, and these guys are bringing in this outside product. And I was interviewing with DePuy at the time. And I was like, "Oh, like who are you doing that with?" And he was like, "Oh, it's the DePuy Synthes spine guys." And I was like, "That's not is that the Icotech product, the carbon fiber Icotech tumor product that they use?" And he sort of turned his head and he was like, "It is." So I was like, I'm
It
interviewing over there and just talked to Colin about that. So
wow.
all that kind of just worked its way out.
Now that is amazing that you were able to, through a family friend that was friends with your parents, who was next door neighbors, was able to have that breakfast set up even during that interview process. Um, and that's fantastic. And you know what? I do also think, that, you know, you and me were, we're men of faith. We believe that in God's providence, He guides us. And, for some of our listeners, they, may hold another faith. They may not be Christian. Um, they may be atheists, but I do believe that when we work hard, when we show up, sometimes good things come along. Sometimes I would say God just allows, you know, God allows providentially things to happen. It may be luck, but it seems that good luck happens most to those who are faithfully doing the right thing. You're showing
Yep.
up,
Yep.
treating people with respect, you're acting with integrity, um, and sometimes we get a bonus, right? Sometimes something comes our way, and sometimes it's unexpected. And also, what I love about your story here too is even though all these good things were happening with J&J, you didn't put all your trust just in that one company. You were still faithfully doing the right thing, interviewing with other companies, leveraging. And I think that's some good takeaways for all of our, everyone going through our program. Is so often we get so excited about that one physician that we met with, that one company, and then before you know it, they come down to be one of the final two candidates and they don't get the job. But you would have landed something else, and I'm confident of that, even if this hadn't have worked out because you're doing the right thing regardless. Um, okay, now tell us, you're starting here in about how many weeks?
So it's March is the 18th today. I start May 6th. So I got
Okay,
that 7, 8 weeks ish because my
that
commencement
sounds
for
good.
graduation is the 5th on a Sunday.
We'll release this podcast right around that time. So we're excited for you, Dylan. You're always learning. You're always growing. Your what books or podcasts, are there anything in your personal life that is helping you to develop as a leader? Things that you're studying, maybe books or a podcast or anything like that?
Yeah, I think there's a few. I think the one that jumps to mind as a leader I'm listening. I'm not finished with it yet, so I'm cheating a little bit, but I'm listening to Atomic Habits right now. And I think just
Yes.
as I come out of college, and like I said, sometimes you get that 15-hour day. So for me, I would like to get up and spend time with Jesus in the morning, and I would also like to work out, and that's going to require me to get up in the ballpark of 4:30 if I want to be to the hospital on time. So
Wow.
learning like practical things out of Atomic Habits has been really really helpful for me. So I've enjoyed that one a lot. I'm three-fourths the way through Winning by Tim Grover. It's about He's the
Okay.
guy that trained Michael Jordan and Kobe.
Jordan and
Uh,
Kobe.
yeah, so it's if you're a sports junkie, it's your book.
I
It's
would
really
love to
really
read.
fascinating. So it's honestly maybe not as good for leadership development. May not be as good to answer the question that you asked me, but
No,
it's
I
sitting
think
here on
those
my
are
desk.
great books. Yeah, I love that. James Clear, I would like he lives here in Columbus. I would love to someday meet him. And great books. And the trainer, I've heard of him. I think I follow him on Instagram. But yeah, just the stories that Jordan said about him, in the early days when Jordan was getting beat up by the Pistons, you know, and I think he did this on the special that ESPN did a few years back, where he said, I want to stop taking the punishment. I want to start punishing them. So Jordan would actually lift on game days. And just like what you're saying, if you want to be good all around in life and you still want to have that quiet time. You said you want to put Jesus first, you want to read the Bible. It means you need to wake up early. You're not just going to be a spiritual person, you're going to be physically disciplined. That means working out, getting up early, because you might have to be in the operating room by 7 o'clock. Those are habits that no matter whether it's medical sales, and I quote Jim Collins in his book Good to Great all the time, that he says, you get the right habits and you get the right people on the bus, it doesn't matter what that bus is going to do. And I think this is a great foundation that you're building right now, Dylan, and I'm excited for you. You also were proactive on LinkedIn. So when we first connected, you actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. And I think that's one of the first steps that we tell our students, those going through our program who are wanting, a lot of them are not effectively using LinkedIn. How did you even come across my page and reach out to me on LinkedIn?
Yeah. Yeah, so again, at the start of my network process, just trying to get in and like add to connect with people on LinkedIn and meet with them for coffee that I knew that were in the industry. And that sort of snowballs into how I ended up getting to you. Because I was connected to a few people on LinkedIn. And so we had mutual connections. So because I've reached out to a handful of people on LinkedIn where it's just a long shot. It's like, hey, I'm a guy in college and I'm looking to learn, and that doesn't play very well. But when it's, hey, we know a couple of the same people, and I asked a couple of people about you ahead of time, and I was like, these people speak very highly of you. And I think something that has been really helpful for me is because again, when you're asking someone to invest in you, I think finding a way to add value, and the way that I do that, which you can take it or leave it, is offer to buy someone a cup of coffee because I'm a coffee guy. So it's like, hey, if you'll take an hour to invest in me, I would love to buy you coffee. And I'm gonna show up, and this isn't including the text, but yeah, I'm gonna show up prepared. I'm gonna show up with good questions. I'm gonna show up looking the part. I'm gonna show up with a jacket on. I'm gonna show up with a button up on. And that's sort of how that snowballs. So, I knew Kevin, I knew a couple of people, and then you get mutual connections popping up. LinkedIn does that under your username, and you get mutuals, and then you can reach out and ahead of time reaching out, you can be like, "Hey, what do you think of Dave Sterrett? What do you think? How is he? How is he as a guy? How is he as a person to do business with?" And you have very good outside testimony, which I think comes as a shock to no one. But I asked a few people about you, and they were like, "Dude, if you can get into contact with him, get into contact with him." So, sort of shot my shot and offered to buy you coffee and to add a little bit of value if I could, and try to make it worth your time whenever we showed up to meet for coffee.
I like that. And the thing is, you know, um, those of us in the industry, and I'll be the same with you after a while, you'll be having lots of people wanting to do that. But I do think the reason I said yes to you is one, is you did leverage a couple people that I knew, right? So you mentioned someone that I just recently uh, talked to and met, and I thought, oh, well, that's a friend of mine, so I'm going to meet Dylan. You leverage LinkedIn, and that's the power of an acquaintance. My friend in Dallas, Bob Bodine, wrote a book called The Power of Who. And he talks about how you know everybody you have to know, and you can leverage friends who can then leverage contacts with acquaintances as well. It opens up the door. Also, you're very specific in meeting me for coffee. You're willing to drive my way. I live out in Hilliard, 20 minutes from campus, and you drove out my way to meet at a time convenient for me. That spoke volumes. And I think is there's a lot of people that I want to help in medical sales, but just the basic things they're not always doing. You're doing effectively the job of sales, of taking initiative in order to get the job in sales. And I think that would be true with all the people who are listening, who are wanting to gain those insights and to follow a path similar to yours. So, Dylan, thank you for your time. Thank you so much for jumping on the show. And I just wish you the best with your new opportunity.
Thank you, man. Again, I appreciate it and am humbled and excited to share my experience. But nothing that I shared was really an original thought. That's the accumulation of meeting with guys like you and guys like Kevin taking the chance to invest in me. So it's just a big thanks, and the fact that I can have this as my background in my college house and get to land a job in medical sales. I hope that's encouraging to a couple of people out there. So just thankful to a lot of different people, and if I started naming names, this would go on for too long. So very thankful to guys like you for taking the time to invest in me.
Oh, thank you, Dylan. Wish you the best. We'll
Thank
be
you.
in touch and we'll be watching your success.
Sounds like a plan, man.